Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are opening up a massive corporate cold case. We're doing a full-on autopsy of one of the most spectacular business failures in modern history, the absolute collapse of Eastman Kodak. I mean, just imagine inventing the exact technology that is going to change the entire world, literally holding the future in the palm of your hand, and then deciding to shove it in a closet because you're too terrified of what it might do to your current profits. Well, that is exactly the Kodak story. Back in 1975, a young Kodak engineer named Steven Sasson presented the world's very first digital camera prototype to his bosses, and their response, quote, "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." No way, right? They literally brushed off the entire digital revolution. So to really understand why Kodak failed its evolution, here is our roadmap for today. 1. Inventing their own demise. 2. The innovator's dilemma. 3. The corporate identity crisis. 4. The desperate pivots. And 5. Lessons from the fall. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Inventing their own demise. You see, Kodak's downfall didn't happen because they were blindsided by some unknown competitor. It happened because of a technological paradox they created themselves. And guys, the sheer scale of this collapse is just staggering. Back in 1996, Kodak was an absolute titan, commanding 90% of the US film market and raking in almost $16 billion in revenue. Today, their trailing 12-month revenue for 2025 sits at just $1.06 billion. To put that into perspective, we are talking about a corporate giant that practically evaporated into thin air. And the seeds of that evaporation, they were planted way back in 1975. Now, Sasson's invention was heavy. It was literally the size of a toaster, and it took an agonizing 20 seconds to record a single grainy black and white image. But it proved one fatal concept. Photography no longer needed film. The very company making billions from photographic film and chemicals had just birthed the exact device that would make all of that completely obsolete. Section 2. The Innovator's Dilemma. This brings us to the core strategic paralysis of the company, a classic case of the innovator's dilemma. This happens when your greatest innovation threatens the very product that makes you the most money. So what did Kodak do? They chose to protect those highly lucrative film revenues instead of commercializing digital tech. They poured money into better film and better chemical processing. Basically, they were trying to build a faster horse while everyone else was busy building the automobile. Forrester research breaks down exactly where Kodak went wrong strategically, especially when you compare them to their fierce Japanese rival Fujifilm. First up, they completely failed at what's called value capture, basically extending current markets. While Kodak got comfortable, Fujifilm went on the attack. They aggressively slashed prices and pulled off a massive marketing coup by sponsoring the 1984 LA Olympics. So while Fujifilm tripled its US market share to 20%, Kodak just bled out, plummeting to a mere 7% by 2010. But honestly, it gets worse. Kodak also completely failed at value creation, which is expanding into adjacent markets. Both of these companies had incredible expertise in chemical engineering from making film, right? Well, when film died, Fujifilm took their antioxidant chemical tech and brilliantly pivoted it into Astalift, which became a wildly successful skincare and cosmetics line. And Kodak? They completely lack that kind of vision. In 1994, they just spun off their chemical subsidiary, Eastman Chemical, entirely. And today, Eastman Chemical makes 10 times the revenue of Kodak. It's just a massive missed opportunity. Section 3. The Corporate Identity Crisis. So you might be wondering, why couldn't they pivot? Well, the answer is deeply psychological and structural. Research by Usuva maps out this massive friction that traditional manufacturers face when trying to become providers of smart digital solutions. At its core, you have a company whose entire DNA, its processes, its routines, its organizational chart, is hardwired to manufacture and distribute physical, chemical film. Trying to force that exact same machinery to suddenly develop fast-moving digital software, it creates total chaos. The researchers actually call these identity inertia barriers. Kodak was fundamentally trapped by its own identity. You had rigid mindsets, massive internal dissonance, and intense frustration among middle managers who were essentially fighting to defend their dying departments. When CEO Antonio Perez took over in 2005, he lacked the vision to unite everyone, which just sparked internal turf wars between the digital and traditional teams. They simply couldn't shift from a product-oriented manufacturer to a customer-oriented digital service model. And the tragic culmination of all this paralysis? $525 million. That is the severely disappointing amount Kodak walked away with in late 2012 when they sold off their 1,100 digital imaging patents during their Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, experts initially estimated those patents, which were literally the foundational building blocks of digital photography, to be worth between $2 and $3 billion with a B. But having lost all their leverage, Kodak was forced to sell them off for a fraction of that just to meet their bankruptcy financing milestones.
Section 4. The Desperate Pivots.
Now, Kodak does survive bankruptcy in 2013, but they emerge as a total ghost ship. What follows is a timeline of desperate, frankly astonishing pivots. In 2016, they attempt consumer electronics. Then in 2018, they suddenly jump into the cryptocurrency craze. And in 2020, they try their hand at being a pharmaceutical manufacturer. Let's break these down because it gets pretty wild. The crucial thing to understand here is that absolutely none of these moves made any sense for the brand. In 2016, they proudly announced they were reviving the 1965 Super 8 film camera, but pricing it between $2,500 and $3,000. I mean, who was that for? Then came the Ektra smartphone, which tech reviewers absolutely roasted for being clunky with terrible battery life. But 2018 was probably the most absurd. They licensed their name to the Kosh miner, a scheme where people paid $3,400 to rent a Bitcoin mining rig with promises of magical returns. It was widely criticized as a scam and eventually shut down. Oh, and they also announced Kodak Coin for photographers, which basically vanished into thin air. Then came 2020. Out of nowhere, Kodak announced a pivot to manufacturing generic drug ingredients, somehow securing a massive $765 million federal loan from the U.S. Defense Production Act. Obviously, Kodak's stock price went entirely vertical, but that loan was rapidly suspended amidst probes into exactly how the deal was secured. Later on, Kodak actually admitted that during all this chaos, 5 former executives collected millions by exercising stock options they didn't even own. It cost the company $5.1 million in compensation expenses. Honestly, it was a complete and utter debacle.
Section 5. Lessons from the Fall.
So why does studying this corporate autopsy matter so much to us today? First, never fall in love with your current business model. Kodak thought they were in the film business. Actually, scratch that, they were in the memory business. Customers don't care about the medium. They only care about the value, which in this case was instant, shareable memories. And perhaps the biggest takeaway? If your new innovation threatens your most profitable product, you have to launch it anyway. Because if you don't disrupt yourself, the future isn't going to wait for your permission. Someone else will do it for you. And there's a dark, yet incredibly poignant historical parallel to end on here. Back in 1932, Kodak's legendary founder, George Eastman, was suffering from an incurable, incredibly painful spinal disease. Realizing he had accomplished his goals and that his quality of life was gone, he took his own life. He left behind a simple, heavy note. To my friends, my work is done. Why wait? Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Eastman knew exactly when it was time to let go. Kodak, the corporation, revolutionized how humanity captures its history, but its true work was completed decades ago. As it stumbles from Bitcoin mining to smartphone failures to suspended pharma loans, we really have to ask, is it finally time for Kodak's corporate entity to do the same and close its doors permanently? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you some incredible insights to take into your own ventures. I'll see you next time.